In our history, it's written how black men are abused, but what we are going to reveal is going to make you scream. Today, we will unveil how white women sexually abuse black slaves. Gendered assumptions about sexual power have played a significant role in diverting attention away from the pervasive abuse endured by black male slaves at the hands of white women throughout history. These assumptions have their roots in deeply ingrained societal norms and stereotypes that have historically positioned men as the sole perpetrators of sexual violence and women as incapable of such heinous acts. This skewed perspective has created a blind spot in our understanding of the complexities of sexual abuse within the context of slavery. The prevailing narrative, both historically and to some extent even today, portrays women as inherently weak, emotionally fragile, and devoid of the capacity for sexual aggression or dominance. This unfounded notion has not only perpetuated harmful gender stereotypes, but has also hindered the recognition and acknowledgement of the suffering endured by black male slaves at the hands of white women. By failing to recognize and address this aspect of abuse, society has not only marginalized the experiences of black male slaves, but also perpetuated a flawed understanding of sexual violence. It is essential to challenge and deconstruct these gendered assumptions to ensure a more comprehensive and accurate historical narrative that acknowledges the full scope of abuse during slavery, regardless of the gender of the perpetrators. This shift in perspective is vital, not only for historical accuracy, but also for promoting empathy, understanding, and justice in contemporary discussions of sexual abuse and power dynamics. Now brace yourself for a journey through the secrets of the past that society tried to bury but can no longer be denied. This is a story of courage, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of justice in the face of a dark and sinister truth. Are you ready to confront the hidden chapter of history that was meant to stay buried, or will you be forever haunted by the secrets that have come to light? The abuse suffered by black male slaves at the hands of white women encompassed a disturbing array of forms, each reflecting the harrowing depths of their exploitation and vulnerability. These multifaceted forms of abuse were not only degrading but also left enduring scars on the victim's physical, psychological, and emotional well-being. Physical assault was a grim reality for many black male slaves who endured beatings, whippings, and other forms of physical violence at the hands of their enslavers. The use of brute force was not only a means of control, but also a method of punishment for any perceived infractions or resistance. Forced reproduction was another horrendous aspect of their abuse. Enslaved men were subjected to sexual exploitation and forced to father children who would become property of the enslavers. This cruel practice was a means of increasing the enslaved population and maintaining control over future generations. Sexual coercion and manipulation were tactics employed to exert dominance and control over black male slaves. Enslavers used their positions of power to coerce sexual acts, leaving the victims emotionally and psychologically scarred. Psychic abuse involving mental and emotional torment was equally damaging. It included degradation, humiliation, and the systematic stripping of an individual's sense of self-worth. The revelation of white women's active involvement in the institution of slavery is a crucial and often overlooked aspect of the historical narrative. Data underscores the extent of their participation, with approximately 40% of all slave owners in the United States being white women. This statistic challenges preconceived notions of white femininity during the era, which often portrayed women as passive bystanders in the brutal machinery of slavery. Did white women's ownership of enslaved individuals go beyond symbolism? How did it influence their economic interests and marriage prospects? Were they active participants in the brutal business of human trafficking? How did they react when enslaved individuals sought their freedom? White women's ownership of enslaved individuals was not merely symbolic, it had profound implications for the lives and well-being of those in their custody. Their economic interests were closely tied to slavery, as owning a significant number of enslaved people enhanced their marriage prospects and provided a source of labor and wealth. This economic stake incentivized white women to actively engage in the buying, selling, and management of enslaved individuals. The active participation of white women in the institution of slavery extended far beyond mere ownership. They played integral roles in every aspect of this oppressive system. Historical records reveal that white women were not passive bystanders, but instead engaged in the buying, selling, management, and pursuit of enslaved individuals with the same fervor as their male counterparts. White women, particularly those in the southern United States, actively participated in the trade of enslaved people, buying and selling them as commodities. They viewed enslaved individuals as both a source of labor and economic value, demonstrating their direct involvement in the brutal business of human trafficking. Even in cases of enslaved individuals seeking their freedom, white women were not passive. They actively sought the return of those who attempted to escape, often employing legal and extra-legal means to reclaim their property. This comprehensive involvement of white women challenges historical stereotypes and narratives that downplay their role in perpetuating slavery. It underscores the need to recognize their active and often brutal participation in this dark chapter of history, shedding light on the complex web of complicity that extended across gender lines in sustaining the institution of slavery. The determined efforts of white women to preserve their economic interests and wealth through slavery is an important historical aspect that is often overlooked in discussions of post-Civil War America. This is despite the profound societal shifts that were brought about by the end of the Civil War and the abolition of slavery. This is an important historical dimension that is often overlooked in discussions of post-Civil War America. After the end of the Civil War and the formal abolition of slavery, white women in the South were faced with the prospect of the imminent loss of their most significant source of income and economic security. This loss was directly attributable to the war's aftermath. Many people, in an effort to protect their financial interests, turned to exploitative labor contracts which frequently mirrored the working circumstances of slaves. These contracts kept newly emancipated black people linked to oppressive terms, which perpetuated a system of forced labor that continued even after they were legally freed. White women maintained to safeguard their economic stakes by employing legal measures to keep control over formerly enslaved individuals. This was done so that they could continue to profit from their economic interests. They fought in court to either keep ownership of their human property or establish claims to compensation for the loss of ownership of their human property. This dogged effort to protect economic interests offers light on the intricate interplay of race, economics, and power in the era immediately following the American Civil War. It casts doubt on the idea that the abolition of slavery ushered in an instant and fundamental change toward racial and economic equality. In its place, it highlights the persistent legacy of slavery and the lengths to which some persons were ready to go to protect their money, even in the face of changing society norms and legal frameworks. In particular, it sheds light on the extent to which some individuals were willing to go to preserve their wealth. Slave tales that ventured to show white women as abusers were met with systematic repression in order to maintain the established social order and promote the idealized image of white femininity. This was done in the name of preserving the prevailing social order. The carefully created narrative of the antebellum South, in which white women were portrayed as delicate, virtuous, and morally superior beings, came under attack from these narratives, which posed a threat to the narrative. The presentation of white women as oppressors contradicted the deeply ingrained preconceptions that presented them as passive bystanders or victims within the institution of slavery. This portrayal of white women as oppressors shattered the myth of their innocence and demolished the myth of their innocence. These kinds of tales threw off the power structure that existed during that era because they suggested that white women were not just complicit but also active participants in the enslavement and mistreatment of people who were held as slaves. Southern society aggressively stifled or rejected tales that showed white women as abusers so that they could preserve their control and preserve their social status. This was done so that they could maintain control and protect their social standing. Those who dared to speak out while they were enslaved suffered terrible penalties, some of which included physical abuse, revenge, or being disbelieved. Slave narratives that were successful in entering the public arena were frequently filtered or modified to exclude any references to the complicity of white women in the institution of slavery. Not only did the suppression of these narratives help sustain a skewed historical record, but it also made it more difficult for a wider audience to comprehend the full extent of the tragedies that were caused by slavery. It highlighted the significance of sustaining the image of white womanhood and the status quo, even if it meant sacrificing the truth and justice in the process. For the purpose of combating the deeply ingrained prejudice and pervasive racism that have endured throughout history, it is vital to acknowledge the historical suppression strategies that have been used.